Right, YouTubers. Remember the story about Boris Johnson, and he was showing this article about this child being treated on a hospital floor, laying on coats and what have you? It was fake. It was done to discredit Boris Johnson, so everybody voted for Labour. I'm about to show you this video in a minute, which proves it. And you remember when he had the news reporter's phone in his pocket? Boris Johnson knew he was being tracked. He was trying to track him. He already knew. That's why he put the phone in his pocket. He didn't want nothing to do with the games. He didn't want nothing to do with their trap. He already knew about the situation with a boy. But soon after, Jeremy Corbyn seized it and seized the newspaper for his press conference, trying to track Boris Johnson, trying to discredit Boris Johnson. They're playing some really nasty, unhanded games to stop Brexit. They're trying everything to discredit Boris Johnson. The reason I don't like Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson, as I've always said, is a modern day Winston Churchill. He knows what they're going to do before they even do it. They would lie about him. ITV's now becoming like Channel 4 with false news and spinning the stories to get what Labour wants. So I'm going to play this video now. Please listen. Please take it in.
Up to a point where journalists were scrutinising Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, despite the fact that he's only been Prime Minister for a few months, and they're blaming everything on him, basically. We're going to look at the story behind the photo in this video, but also what happened with one of the interviews that Boris Johnson did with ITV. ITV is also turning into a new version of Channel 4 in terms of fake news and spinning. But before we get to that, the Daily Mirror front page said that boy 4 is treated on the floor in hospital because there are no beds available. Now we're going to actually look into this and see if that's true. Spoiler alert, it's not. Now, Jeremy Corbyn was doing a rally in Bristol and he took a massive advantage of this story. He was speaking and he had a copy of the Mirror in his hand, and he was talking about this story because apparently this is the end of the world and it's all because of the Conservative government. Now, ITV interviewed Boris Johnson on this issue. Actually, the interview was supposed to be about Brexit because Boris was somewhere making a speech about Brexit, and ITV is actually turning into a new version of Channel 4 when it comes to spinning and manipulating the stories. And this happened. So according to the CNN and actually other outlets as well, during the interview, the Prime Minister grabbed the reporter's phone and refused to look at the photograph of a 4-year-old boy. Now, let's watch a clip of this interview to see what happened exactly.
Have you seen the photo, Prime Minister? Have you seen the photo?
I've been told about it by the BBC. We need to be making investments.
This is the photo.
We need to be making investments now.
Right, he said he already heard about the report from the BBC. He already knew what they was up to.
Suspected of pneumonia. Forced to lie on the floor on a pile of coats.
I understand. And obviously we have every possible sympathy for everybody who has a bad experience in the NHS.
Look at it now. This is Jack Willoughby.
If you don't mind, I'll give you an interview now. What we are doing is we are taking this country forward.
You refuse to look at the photo. You've taken my phone, put it in your pocket, Prime Minister. His mother says the NHS is in crisis. What's your response to that?
I'm sorry. It's a terrible, terrible photo, and I apologise, obviously, to the families and all those who have terrible experiences in the NHS.
Well, as you can see, The Guardian and other outlets claimed that Boris Johnson refused to look at a picture of the boy. You can see he's looking at the picture, but as I said earlier, he could have actually done it sooner than that. He could have just looked at the photo and briefly and say, I know the story, I'm going to find out more, and the NHS is under pressure, all the usual lines, and then just move on. But I also know why he tried to avoid it at the beginning, because he knew this was a trap, this was a gotcha type of interview.
Yeah.
And
Boris Johnson knew it was a trap.
So now, as I said, in this video, we're going to look at the story behind that photo exactly and see what we know. But before we continue, if you're new to this channel and if you're enjoying the content, make sure you click on the subscribe button and the bell next to it so you get notified.
There you go, Boris Johnson.
5:45 p.m. Now, on the day, Labour activists used
that story about the boy on the coach in the hospital was a trap.
Movement and
they're trying to entrap him,
chase down Tory
trying to discredit him,
down the country, including
so people don't vote for him,
Matt Hancock.
and Brexit goes out the window.
Matt Hancock, sleeping on the floor in the hospital. Shame on you, sleeping on the floor. Shame on you, Matt Hancock. Shame on you. Children sleeping on the floor of hospitals.
And if you think this was bad, they're now preparing to milkshake Boris Johnson and other Tory politicians. Someone tweeted, "We just waited out in the cold in Barnard Castle for him, that's Boris Johnson, at 3 p.m, but he decided not to show up. I had a milkshake ready and everything." There are other posts with the actual website, milkshakeboris.com, that would basically recommend people to milkshake.
So because of that lie about a story with the boy on the floor,
To milkshake Boris and the first person to milkshake.
I now want to find milkshakes at Boris Johnson.
Now, you wonder where all this is actually coming from. Well, when you have senior politicians like John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn publicly advocating this sort of behaviour, well, don't be surprised.
I want to be in a situation where no Tory MP, no Tory MP, no coalition minister can travel anywhere in the country or show their face anywhere in public without being found.
Now, going back to that NHS photo, the Labour Party are spinning the whole story to blame the whole thing on the Conservative government. Well, the problem with having a system like the NHS is that it's so centralised that obviously the government will get all the blame, unlike any other country. So any specific hospital or a clinic that don't treat the patients properly, they're not going to get the blame. It's going to be the government. It's going to be the Prime Minister or the Health Secretary. And that's the problem. That's one of the problems with the NHS. And these Labour activists who are going around and shouting about this seem to have forgotten all the stories that came under Labour. Apparently they've forgotten about what happened at Stafford Hospital with all the victims. They forgot about the babies born in hospital corridors, a bed shortage forced 4,000 mothers to give birth in lifts, offices and toilets in 2009. They forgot about the worst hospital scandal for 10 years in 2010 when it was revealed that Labour were that had to have the biggest review of safety because of this. They forgot that because of Mid Staffordshire NHS problems, they had to have an inquiry, a public inquiry into this problem. And all this happened under Labour. Now, I'm not going to use the left-wing line of blaming everything on the Labour government, because when a hospital don't know how to manage their organisation or a clinic, well, the point that we have to consider is the actual staff, the management and the staff, and especially if there are specific nurses or doctors or staff members who should be blamed, or if it's a bigger problem, the management. Then you go to the top. Now, that's the problem we have with Leeds. They are having issues with the emergency section, the A&E, and obviously that has to be reviewed, and the government's already said they're going to put a lot of money in it. But this story that was leaked and given to the Mirror originally, the person behind it was a Corbynista. The person behind this story is David Wrigley, who is a Corbynista who has suggested that the NHS is for sale, apparently, under Conservatives. This is the person behind this leak. Now, we have a statement from the hospital about what actually happened on that day. The hospital management said, "We have seen a significant increase in the number of people visiting our paediatric emergency department, and this week we saw the highest attendances that we have seen since April 2016. Despite this, our staff are working tirelessly to provide the best possible care under these extreme pressures." Jack was quickly assessed upon arrival and seen in 2 different clinical treatment rooms in the paediatric emergency department. Within 4 hours, a decision was made to admit Jack to our children's assessment and treatment unit for further monitoring overnight, which is basically their target. So they have basically hit their target of 4 hours. Unfortunately, the unit was also experiencing exceptionally high levels of demand, which meant that Jack was required to wait in the clinical treatment room in the paediatric emergency department.
Well, there you go.
CAT unit later that evening and was discharged home the following morning. Now, when it comes to that photo of Jack on the floor, the staff and the management of the hospital have denied. They said that just like any other hospital, when it's busy, when you have to wait, they give a chair to the patient and the parents, and they've done the same apparently to Jack, and they don't put patients on the floor. They've said because one, hygiene is a problem, and two, health and safety, because people need to walk in the corridors and you can't really block anyone. Now, on social media, we had a number of nurses and doctors telling their story and how they work and how this story could not be true. But we also had some fake news, so we have to clarify there was a lot of fake news going around, including this specific post that was going around that started by saying, very interesting, a good friend of mine is a senior nurse at Leeds Hospital, and it goes on. This was massively denied. This is fake news. This was never actually confirmed. The person who started sending this, people were starting basically copy and paste it. So this was, ignore this. But there were a number of others, actual...
There you go, it's fake news. It wasn't a real picture.
One person said, I work in a very busy London A&E. We don't let anyone lie on the floor as a general rule, let alone a child with an O2 mask. Even if it's busy, you prioritize beds for those that need them. This is sick Labour propaganda. You might ask why we don't let people lie
sick Labour propaganda. It was false.
And also health and safety. A&E is busy with heavy trolleys moving everywhere all the time. Also, a person on the floor is a trip hazard, and yeah, as I said before. And we even had Alison Pearson retweeting a tweet from someone saying, I worked as a nurse for 20 years and no nurse would let a 4-year-old sick child lie on the floor. Another tweet said, as if the NHS staff would not hang the IV drip bag or offer blankets instead of him lying on a coat. His mum just put him on the floor and snapped a photo. Now, some of these stories that came on social media were true, some of them fake news, but the sentiment is there. And my mother is a nurse herself, and I've also spoken to her about this, and it shouldn't happen. It's not normal practice. If it has happened, it's the fault of the specific nurse or staff member. So don't go around basically targeting the whole Department of Health. It doesn't work that way. And this is, as I said, it goes back to the whole issue of the NHS, because it's so centralized that instead of holding the staff and the management of a specific hospital to account, the easiest thing to do is just blame the Prime Minister. And it's not right, because this is not how you make reforms. But people aren't stupid, because we've seen the polls recently. People still trust Boris Johnson and the Tories more than Labour because of all this propaganda. The latest numbers that said which of the following would be best for the NHS: Conservative government led by Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, 44%. Labour led by Jeremy Corbyn and Ashworth, 37%. Now, we mentioned Jonathan Ashworth. We're actually going to release another video straight after this later tonight about Jonathan Ashworth, who had his conversation leaked about his views on Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. So make sure that you subscribe and click on the bell next to it so you get notified when that video comes out. If you enjoy the content, obviously we are now almost at 95,000 subscribers, so thanks again for supporting. If you want to support this channel, we have our merchandise site, and obviously we have various t-shirt designs and merchandise. If you want to buy a Christmas present for a friend or a family member, we have the All I Want for Christmas is Brexit t-shirts, and this comes
about the child on the coat in the hospital was fake. It wasn't real. They just want to use it to discredit Boris Johnson. As you head there, the mum just put the child on the coat to take a photo. It wasn't real. It wasn't really happening. It was nothing to do with the hospital. It was the mother laying the child on the coat to take a photo. Then the picture got leaked. How it got leaked, I don't know. But they chose to try and use it to put spin on it to discredit Boris Johnson. To try and stop people voting for Boris Johnson and vote for Labour. That way, you vote for Labour, Labour wins, Brexit gets stopped. We lose the British Army, we lose the British pounds and end up with Euro. Border stays open, and we end up with the EU Army. All goes P-Tom. There's also another video on here. Bear with me while I try and find it. well, and his own Labour MP clearly says Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn is not fit to run the Labour Party, let alone be Prime Minister. So bear with me a minute while I try and find it. Here we go. Got it. This is Jeremy Corbyn's own Labour MP saying this.
Be a Labour MP, and I only ever really wanted to be the Labour MP for Dudley, you know, and it's been such a huge privilege to do this job I've loved, the place I love. But I've got to be honest with people, and I'm not going to run this election. The country faces a big choice. There's only two people who can be Prime Minister on December the 13th, Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson. And I think Jeremy Corbyn is completely unfit to lead our country, completely unfit to lead the Labour Party. And after 34 years I joined the Labour Party as a teenager. I worked for the Labour Party. You know, in my 30s, I was a government advisor. In my 40s, I was an MP and a minister. So it's really come to something when I tell decent, traditional, patriotic Labour voters that they should be voting for Boris Johnson at this election. I can't believe it's come to this, but that's where we are. You, someone who, let's be honest, used to pick up the phone to this programme and have the odd shout occasionally when you were Gordon Brown's press secretary. Let's be clear, you are telling people to vote Conservative, to vote for Boris Johnson. I am. I think this is the choice the country faces. The British people are going to have, look, the public's got to make this choice. You know, the British people have got to decide this. Lots of Labour voters, traditional, decent Labour voters, are going to be grappling with this question. And if they've got to face up to that, then I don't think people like me should have the luxury of running away from it. Look, I could, you know, just announce I'm standing down, disappear off back to Dudley, you never hear from me again. But in the end, I think people have put themselves forward for elected office, positions in politics. You've got a responsibility to stand up, tell the truth, do what's right.
So there you go. That was a Labour MP. He turned around and said, Jeremy Corbyn's not even fit to be the leader of the Labour Party, let alone run the country. And you heard it yourself there, a Labour MP is telling people don't vote for Labour, vote for Boris Johnson, because Jeremy Corbyn is not fit to be the leader of the Labour Party, let alone run the country. You see what Jeremy Corbyn's just done. So there you go, YouTubers. There's the truth. There's the truth. There's the truth. I tells you. Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party got a hold of a photo that a mum took of a child laying on the floor, even though she put the child on the coat and obviously put it on the internet somewhere. A Labour MP has come across the photo on a website somewhere, leaked it to the newspapers and everything else. Oh, look at this, the under Conservative, the children are laying on the floor and coats, how, end of the world, all that bollocks. But it's just a harmless photo of the mother putting the child on some coats so she could take a photo, put the child back on the seat and all the rest of it. They're doing everything possible to discredit Boris Johnson. Then at the end of this video, you heard a Labour MP turn around and telling traditional, loyal Labour voters they need to vote Conservative. They need to vote for Boris Johnson. Because Jeremy Corbyn is not fit to be Prime Minister. He's not fit to run the Labour Party. His own MPs are stabbing him in the back because he's that bad. So there you go. You heard how they tried to discredit Boris Johnson by an innocent picture, which wasn't true. You've now heard a Labour MP telling traditional, honest Labour voters they need to vote Conservative. They need to vote for Boris Johnson. So everything is pointing to Boris Johnson to remain in office as Prime Minister. Labour is getting hold of pictures and lying about the Prime Minister, lying about this, lying about that, grabbing innocent photos, putting a spin on them, leaking them to the newspapers, leaking them to the TV news stations to discredit Boris Johnson. Absolute lies. We don't want somebody like that as Prime Minister. We want people like Boris Johnson who turned around and said, yes, I will get a new deal. Yes, I will get the backstop gone. And he stuck to his word and he done what he said. We all need to vote for Boris Johnson to give him a majority in the House of Commons, and we can get Brexit done and get back to matters that deal with this country. God bless, be safe.